When it comes to your retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you found the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez, founder and managing member of ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hats and get ready to take back control of your retirement today. And for all the tomorrows to come, ILG's Financial Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now.
This is the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez and Chase Lopez of ILG Financial. And first of all, Dave, it is great to be back with you. And I understand that Chase is going to be with us today as well. Tell us about how happy you are to have Chase involved and also about what we're going to talk about today.
Sure, Ron. It's good to be back with you. And we love having Chase. He brings so much energy to the show. I guess that's that youthful exuberance, wouldn't you say, Ron?
That sounds good to me.
As most of our clients know, Chase has been with us over a year now, and he has a big part in building these individual plans that we build out for each of our clients. I give Chase the heavy lifting, so he makes me look good in the end. So he, like me, is a math geek, and anyone who works with us knows it is all about the numbers to get it right. There's a mathematical way to build out a plan that's in each client's best interests, and we task Chase to most of that. I got him in the dungeon doing the grunt work, so he loves the chance to get in front of either the mic or the clients and talk about what he spends so much time having a passion working for. So Chase, thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for the intro, Dave. That's really, really kind words.
Well, Dave and Chase, I'm glad to be back with both of you today, and let's go ahead and get started. If you are or have ever been a federal employee, you probably either participate in or have heard of a Thrift Savings Plan, more commonly known as a TSP. So what exactly is the purpose of this type of savings plan? What are the rules? How does it benefit or not benefit you and the goals you have for your retirement? Dave, can you shed a little light on the topic for us?
Well, sure. And I'm glad we're doing this podcast because this is really a misunderstood topic, not just about TSPs, but 401ks in general. So the TSP, which is also known as that, as you said, the Thrift Savings Plan, is the government's version of an employer 401k plan. So the tax, what would you say, Chase, the tax ramifications?
Tax benefits.
Yeah, the benefits are exactly the same as a TSP as if you worked for another firm and they offered you a 401k.
Exactly.
So there's plenty of advantages to that. We are huge advocates of 401ks and TSPs, but like every investment vehicle, there's a time and a place for them. And what we want to spend some time talking about today, Ron, is the advantages and the disadvantages, today in particular, of the TSP. So here's some highlights.
Okay.
The TSP is designed, in our opinion, for saving, growing, and accumulating your money over that 20, 30, or 40 years while you're working. It is not, in our opinion, and we'll spend some time talking about this today, the ideal vehicle for storing your funds during or near retirement. And the reason for that, here's the big picture, and we will always be going back to this because most investors do not know this one key fact, and it can dramatically affect their success in retirement. And Ron, the fact is this: there are two phases. You call them that, right? Phases, Chase?
Two phases.
Two phases of your financial life. The first phase we call the accumulation phase. These are your working years, roughly age 23 to 55 or 58, when you're in or near retirement. During that phase of your life, financially speaking, the goals, I would argue, are pretty much the same for everybody. And they are, put in as much as you can.
Don't touch the money.
Right. And what's the last one, Chase?
And just pick investments that give you the best chance to grow your funds over a long period of time, since we do have that long time horizon.
Right. Does that make sense, Ron?
That makes perfect sense. And, of course, that's, as you said, it pretty much applies to everybody with the same items here. What about the distribution phase? How does that differ?
Right. So we move into the distribution phase. And, back on that accumulation phase, it should be no surprise to the listeners or to you, Ron, that is why over the last 20 or 30 years, you've noticed, if you've talked to friends or coworkers, that everyone pretty much has the exact same advice, haven't they? Which is, just pick some funds that over time have a good average rate of return and don't touch them and keep working.
Yeah.
Because in the accumulation phase, your goals are exactly the same. Build the bucket as big as possible for retirement. Now, as you asked, because you asked, Ron, right, then you move around 55 plus, right, in or near retirement, you are preparing for or entering the distribution phase. And in the distribution phase, and this is the fact, Chase talks about it all the time, that most investors, no one's ever addressed this with them. When you move into the distribution phase, all the rules for investing change. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that your goals have now changed. And let me explain. Remember we said in the accumulation phase, Ron, the goals were the same: grow the bucket as big as possible, don't touch the money, put in as much as you can?
Yep, exactly.
Well, now as you get in or near the distribution phase, those goals go away. Now you are going to distribute this money over the rest of your life. And, we've all heard that term, you can't take it with you. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't take it with you, right? So every penny of the money, Ron, that you have saved for retirement will be distributed. And it's either going to be distributed as monthly checks because you need income to pay the bills, or it's going to be for medical bills, or it's going to be for fun money and trips, or gifts for the grandkids, or paying for the kids' college, or a down payment for your kids' home, or medical bills, right? Or if you're lucky enough to have any at the end of the day when you finally pass, legacy that'll be passed to the kids. Now, I would argue, we forgot long-term care. There's a million uses for how you're going to distribute this money. So now you can see, I think, Ron, that when you get in or near retirement, every plan is going to be completely unique because the goals for everyone are going to be completely unique. You're going to have to start asking questions like, at retirement, do I need money from my TSP to live off of in retirement? If so, when does it start? How much each month? Am I going to need it for life or just for a specific period of time? For example, do I only need that money for 8 years until I turn on my Social Security check? Or am I going to need that money forever? Am I going to need that money maybe not for now, but I might need it if my wife passes away or my husband passes away? We call that survivor income. If a medical bill crops up, right? How's that going to be paid? Can I cover that with my pension? Or do I have to take money out of the TSP for that? Do I plan on paying for long-term care out of my pocket? Or do I have another plan for that? And then we talked about fun, gifts, travel, all of that stuff. We want a plan for how much money you're going to need each year, where it's going to come from, and that's going to affect how we invest that money. So when we're investing our funds in or near retirement, we start with building out a comprehensive plan based on our current best guess of how you are going to distribute that money over time based on the things. Chase, can you give me an example, a concrete example?
Yeah, so for example, if someone needs $5,000 a month for the rest of their lives, here at ILG Financial, we'll advise them to invest that completely differently than someone who doesn't need the money. Maybe they have a couple pensions and they have a Social Security check and that's enough to cover the bills. We would advise them to invest differently if they didn't need the money. Wouldn't you agree, Ron?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking here about this distribution phase. It's really more of a preservation mode when you get to that point.
Well, it sure is. And again, preservation so that you have enough to do what you want to do in retirement. But it's very clear once we say this to folks, and we hear this over and over. Chase kind of jokes. He goes, wow, I can't believe how many people who have worked 30 or 40 years, when we talk about this, they come to us and they say, no one's ever mentioned this to us. Mm-hmm. Well, the reason is, and this is kind of a Achilles heel, I would suggest, of the financial industry. The financial industry is designed, whether it's the government's TSP or a 401k or an individual advisor, to convince you to put your money with them and then hope you stay with them forever. right? So they don't want, it's awkward to address the fact that you're invested in a vehicle like a TSP that had its place, but now as you get in or near retirement, that's not the best place for it anymore because it would mean leaving the TSP or leaving your 401k, and your 401k folks don't want you to leave, and TSP, I would guess, doesn't want you to leave.
That all makes perfect sense. So bottom line, we're not looking to use our TSP account in retirement at all. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and we'll give you some examples as we do this podcast today of places where we think that TSP is great,
right,
and where we encourage you to utilize it. And then there's some situations where it's probably not the best fit, so that now that you have the information, and that's what it's about, isn't it, Ron? And we find this all the time, is we don't actually make decisions for our clients. Once we give them the facts, it is very clear for them what to do. And what we're going to do today is talk about the facts, how a TSP works, its advantages and its disadvantages.
Okay, fair enough. So what are some advantages to using this TSP in the accumulation phase of life? We may go back to that.
Yeah, so in the accumulation phase, one of the huge advantages to the TSP, and we laud it when we're talking to folks, young folks investing, is if you would just want to do broad diversification investing, meaning you don't want to get specific with a company, you just want to spread your money out of the U.S. stock market and have, for example, some exposure, broad exposure to the international stock market and have some safe money. This is about the cheapest way you can invest. The fees are as low as you will find anywhere, maybe 0.1% or 0.25%. Wouldn't you say, Chase?
Yeah, exactly.
In these funds, you have about 5, and this is a challenge. We'll talk about that later. You really only have 5 investments in the TSP. Mm-hmm. That's unusually low, right? The S fund, which invests only in a broad spectrum of small cap U.S. stocks. The I fund, I as an igloo, that invests in international, again, a broad spectrum of unmanaged international stocks. The G fund is almost like your savings bucket. That's government treasuries and pays very little interest currently to date. I think we're under 1%, but very safe. Mm-hmm. Again, very low fees. The C fund, C as in cat, is in U.S. corporate large. So think that's like the S&P or the Dow Jones, your biggest of the big companies in the U.S. And then the last one is the F. F as in Frank. The F fund, which is in bonds, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can get exposure to the U.S., the international, the large cap and the small cap markets, as well as some safety in the G fund and some bond exposure in the F fund, all through the TSP at a very low cost. That's a huge advantage during the accumulation phase.
Yeah, that all sounds like it makes perfect sense to me, and I know that you would be glad to let everybody know more details about all of those different investment options, and all they have to do is give you a call.
Yeah, that's right. We're talking 10,000-foot view, aren't we, Chase, today?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so keep in mind, whenever we're doing the podcast, for time's sake, we're giving you a big picture. We always encourage you, if anything you hear today strikes a chord or is specific to you and you want to peel this onion back and get more information, pick up the phone and call us. I know, Ron, you're going to put the information on the podcast, or go right to our website, ilgfinancial.com. Whenever you go there, as you well know, Ron, there's a place right on the front page where you can click to contact us or set up for a phone call or an in-person meeting, whichever's preferable for you. So we make it very easy to contact Chase or I or anybody on the ILG team.
Well, I'll give you that phone number right now, and we'll repeat it again later on in the podcast. That is 540-720-5656. That is 540-720-5656. And again, I'll pass that along a little bit later on. So what do we need to know on the flip side of the coin? What are some disadvantages that we ought to be aware of when it comes to our TSPs?
Yeah, one of the disadvantages is that they have so few options, right? Mm-hmm. It is not ideal to invest in any bucket where you only have 5 different choices. So you're very limited. We'll give you some examples of that. But another disadvantage is in return for those very low fees, and to be fair to the TSP, they're very transparent about this if you're willing to read the information. They tell you up front there is absolutely no management whatsoever going on inside these 5 funds. They're just buying a broad spectrum of stocks, unmanaged, and it's up to you to self-manage and decide things like how much you want in each bucket and when you want to get in and when you want to get out of each bucket. Now, I do want to mention here, as some of the folks who have TSP might say, Dave, I think you're off base. I know there's a whole bunch of what they call L funds in addition to the 5. Those L funds are what we call target date funds. Basically, they're using the same 5 funds. All they're doing is putting a specific predetermined percentage of your money in each fund based on the target date fund you pick. And by target date, that's usually the date you're planning to retire. So that could be a whole nother podcast, but anybody who's interested, if you reach out to us, phone number or email, I'll send you a Forbes article, a great article called The Problem with Target Date Funds. And it outlines how it's a big concern and how in '08, people really got much lower and negative returns that they weren't counting on in target date funds because they somehow thought it was managed more than it is, and it's not managed at all. It's just the closer you get to the target date, Ron, they move more of your money out of the stock funds, the C, the S, and the I, right, Chase? And they move more into the bonds and the government treasury funds. Now, they'll do that regardless of what else is going on in the world and regardless if it's a good time to sell your stock positions or not. So that's not an ideal thing. And for most folks, those target date funds are not what they think. So I would encourage you to read up on target date funds or get with us to make sure when you get into one of those L funds that it's doing exactly what you're hoping it's doing.
So it's moving into a much more conservative mode at that point, right?
It's every year it automatically moves you a little more to the conservative, and that's not necessarily what you would want to do. I'll give you a great example. Think back to '08, right? When the market tanked 60%, or in '08, 57, I think Chase was roughly, '08, '09. Ideally, common knowledge tells us you don't want to sell low right after a crash, agreed?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, the target date fund doesn't care what happened in '08, '09. It automatically still is going to move from the S fund and the I and the C fund a percentage of your money into something safer, even if it's right after the market crash. Whereas a manager looking at that or you looking at your individual investments might say, I still over time may want to move stuff to safety, but for crying out loud, I don't want to do it after I just lost 57%.
Oh, that makes perfect sense to me. But basically, they assume every investor is on the same page with all the same goals, right?
Again, that's the problem with a target date fund. Again, just like these other 5 funds, you're just getting very little choice. That's really not a bad thing. If you're not into investing and you're 20 or 30 or 40 years old and you're planning to leave this money untouched, it's much more important to just be packing the money away and not looking at it, right, than it is necessarily trying to time the market or get in and out. We're not a fan of timing the market.
Right.
But as you get in your mid-50s, we start getting near retirement. We have a lot less room for error, and a major loss to your portfolio in or near retirement can negatively affect you, Ron, more than any other time in your life. A lot of people don't know that. They've heard all their life, and you might have too, Ron, that the older you get, the safer you should be with your money. Have you heard that?
Absolutely right. You got to hold on to what you got, as they always say.
Now, would it shock you to know mathematically that is inaccurate advice that we've been hearing our whole life?
Yes, it would.
In fact, the data shows, and we've got the statistics to kind of show this. It's really quite fascinating when the math geeks get involved in it. Basically, they say that is not true at all. Mathematically, there is what we call the retirement red zone, and that's the 5 to 6 years before you retire. So think, 57, depending on when you're going to retire, and the 5 to 6 years after you retire. So think maybe 67 or 68, or it'll rotate based on when you retire. But that 10 to 12 year window, mathematically, if you incur a major economic loss to your portfolio in that 10-year window, it will hurt you more than a major economic loss in any other 10-year window in your life. So that's why they call it the red zone. So the reality is, the older you get, once you get past that first 5 years of retirement, you could actually get incrementally more aggressive the older you get, because it's going to hurt you less because, one, your lifespan is less.
Right.
And two, since you haven't had a major economic event, your account's bigger.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. Likewise, if you're very young, right? I tell my daughters, 26, 27, how old is she? 27 now? Yeah. Right? If you've got, $5,000 in your 401k, I said, don't panic If the market crashes 60%, you've lost $2,000 and you've got 40 years to recover.
You know, I like the whole analogy of the red zone as being in a football game. If you get into the red zone, you need to take advantage of your opportunities to put some points on the board. And also, you don't need to make any costly mistakes like a turnover, a fumble, or an interception. And the same thing applies to your financial life.
Boy, you're exactly right. But isn't it interesting that most people have never heard that one key bit? And we talk all the time, Ron, about how just one little piece of information could dramatically change your life when you look back when you're 80 or 85 years old, because it would have been a complete turn on how you invested, and based on how the markets play out over the next 20 or 30 years. That turn could be the difference between you living a comfortable, stress-free retirement or you saying, listen, I ran out of money and it was just bad luck. Who would have guessed that we'd have had this major correction, 5 years into retirement, and now I'm out of money?
So we've talked a lot about TSPs, and Dave, Chase, are there any other advantages we need to think about now?
Yeah, so one of the biggest advantages, and not only to the TSP, but for all employer 401k accounts, is the amount that they allow you to put into these accounts. So with a 401k or a TSP, they allow you up to $19,500, and that's pre-tax money to go into those accounts, tax deferred until, of course, you retire. And then if you're over the age of 50, then you get an additional, what they call a catch-up. So you can contribute an additional, $5,500 to bring your total to $26,000 a year of pre-tax money that you can put into these accounts. Contrast that with an IRA where you can only put about $5,500 into that account with the catch-up of about $6,500.
Yeah, so that's perfect. So there's a great advantage during the accumulation phase, right, yeah, Chase? Is exactly. That if you want to put in more than maybe $5,500, if you're under 50, you're much better off using your 401k or TSP because you can put in up to $19,500, a big advantage for folks who have advantage to the TSP or a 401k. Again, that's the accumulation phase. Another advantage, Ron, is that with most 401ks offer this, and indeed the TSP does, if you need money in an emergency and you're under 59 and a half, because remember, if you take money out of your TSP before 59 and a half, you pay. The federal government charges you a 10% penalty on the money and you're taxed on it. So it's not a thing we want to touch until we get to 59 and a half. However, if something happens and you need money, you can borrow from your TSP with no tax consequences and then pay it back if you want to over time, or pay it back down the road when you finally retire. Now, there are limits to that. They don't let you borrow, I believe it's no more than $50,000, Chase. More than $50,000 is the most you can borrow, and you can't borrow more than 50% of your account value. So if you've got a $300,000 TSP, you could borrow up to $50,000 if you want. Now, they do charge you interest. It's very low, under 1% currently. And ideally, the money still invested in the TSP is at least making enough to cover that. So it's for all intents and purposes, there's a good chance that's an interest-free loan. Now, the disadvantage, and we will get into this, Ron, in the next podcast when we talk about the challenges with the TSP when you get in or near retirement. This is one of them. When you retire or you leave employment with the federal government, if you've got an outstanding 401k loan, you have 90 days to pay that back in full. 90 days to pay that back in full. So, that can be very tricky for a lot of people who borrowed money and they don't have the money to pay it back. And a lot of them may be forced to stay employed with the government even though they have a better job opportunity because they can't afford to pay the money back. So as one more disadvantage I would like to talk about when we get in or near retirement is that it's not ideally suited to give you the flexibility that you may need in retirement, Ron. For example, with your TSP, even in retirement after you're 59 and a half, that's your money, and you should be able to take it out whenever you want. Of course, you have to pay taxes, but no penalty. But with the TSP, they limit you to one withdrawal a month. Now, that can be very problematic because it can limit your opportunities to switch investments. Let's say the market, like in April, crashed 40%, and you've got money that you wanted to put in another investment that the TSP doesn't offer. If you've already taken one withdrawal this month, you can't take it. You're kind of just stuck. There's really no reason you should be limiting your investment options because you've been limited to how many withdrawals you can take into a month. So those are some quick disadvantages when we get in or near retirement. What we'll do, if it's okay with you, Ron, is let's just continue this to the next podcast. We'll have a part 2, and we'll spend more time talking about this important distribution phase and how other investment vehicles might be a better fit than a TSP or a 401k when it's in or near time to retire.
Well, let me just say it's been a pleasure being with you guys today. I'll look forward to the next podcast and passing along some more important information. Income, legacy, growth, it's all right here at ILG Financial, and it's about helping you plan for retirement your way so you can achieve your financial goals. Call ILG Financial at 540-720-5656. That is 540-720-5656. Or go online to ilgfinancial.com to learn more. We'll talk to you next time on the Retire Your Way podcast.
Information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and not necessarily represent the views of Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC, registered investment advisor. Alpha Star and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities.